recorded.
Hello and welcome to today's session. This is Jodia and I'm really pleased to welcome you to the 90th session of the PowerVog Technical Webinar Series. And today I'm really pleased to have David Spurway and Turgut Genc presenting about treasure hunting with Power Enterprise Pools. So without further ado, let me hand over to both David and Turgut to introduce themselves and then for David to kick the session off. Thank you.
Hi, David Spurway here. I'm the Power Systems CTO for the UK and Ireland, and I shall be trying really hard to try and slow down. Let me pass over to Turgut.
Thank you, David. This is Turgut Genc, and thank you, Jyoti, as well. I'm a Senior Lab Services Consultant for Pan-IoT Europe. I'm based in London, UK, but I travel across Europe most of the time. And we will be delivering this presentation together with David. David, it's on you.
Thank you, sir. So yes, as you can see from the presentation slide, this is a presentation that we had the pleasure of presenting at the Technical University in Prague a couple of weeks ago. This was something which has been refreshed from a previous version we did, and we ended up with a theme of treasure hunting with Power Enterprise Pools. Original presentation being for Power Enterprise Pools 1.0, but of course more recently we've had Pools 2.0 also announced. With the Pools 1.0, I have had the experience of helping sort out one or two challenges with that particular technology, hence the term avoiding the pitfalls. And then once we got past some of those challenges, then we can actually get on to the excellent functions and abilities that the pools can be able to use, which aren't just to do with Power Enterprise Pools themselves, but are also synchronized with other products we have to be able to give you excellent functions overall. So with our theme of treasure hunting and also avoiding pitfalls, you may see the occasional pirate turning up as we go through this presentation. When we have the pirates turning up, you can tell that is a potential area for mistakes to occur, or when we get through to the more fun part, then you, of course, you'll get to actually share the rewards as we move forward into that kind of area as well. So what I want to take you through today is we will go through various session objectives here. We have that discussion about the Power Enterprise Pools 1.0. That's just in case you're not aware of those. They have been around a little while, but they are a powerful, flexible, available foundation to be able to give you a private cloud enterprise infrastructure using our enterprise systems. And many of our customers here in the UK and around the world are using these Power Enterprise Pools technologies to be able to provide that kind of private cloud from their own data centers. Also, as I say, fairly recently, we've had the announcement of the next generation of Power Enterprise Pools, Power Enterprise Pools 2.0. That builds, obviously, on what the technology was able to do before and enhances the cloud experience with IBM Power Systems. And certainly from what I've seen, it builds extensively on that. It can take some of the challenges that we had with the first generation and be able to address those and tidy those up, while at the same time being able to give all of the benefits and indeed expand on the benefits that the previous features were able to give you. So what I'll do is I'll take you through some of the common challenges with the first generation, with Power Enterprise Pools 1.0, and also how to avoid them. The majority of customers I'm working with are still using Power Enterprise Pools 1.0. Power Enterprise Pools 2 needs you to be exclusively using the E980 servers, and that's something which I very much expect our customers to move towards, but not all are necessarily doing that right now. So once we've talked about some of the challenges and how to avoid them with Power Enterprise Pools 1, we'll then move on to introducing new features of Power Enterprise Pools 2, and also I've made a fairly recent announcement about how you can migrate from one to the other, how you can come up from Power Enterprise Pools 1.0 and be upgraded into Power Enterprise Pools 2. That also includes if you have a situation where you may have E980s, which you purchased, you are also now able to put those into a Power Enterprise Pool 2.0, and so we'll talk about how we can do that moving on. Then once I've done those pieces, then we pass over to Turgut to be able to explain how Lab Services and also our own IBM products can actually be combined with the Power Enterprise Pools technology to be able to help deliver the treasure, to be able to deliver the benefits from where we see at this point moving on. Do feel free to ask questions as we go along through this if you wish. Jyoti will be monitoring the chat windows and noticing when the questions come in through that medium, and she can therefore interrupt us at the appropriate time, and we're happy to address questions as we go through. Alternatively, we do intend to have time to be able to address questions at the end of the session as well.
can I just add,
So,
David, the
do.
presentation material and the replay for this will be available later. So just let me know if you're not on my mailing list and I will. Thanks.
Indeed, thank you very much. Yes. So, Power Enterprise Pools 1, the original Power Enterprise Pools, powerful foundation, flexible, available, and affordable private cloud IT infrastructure. So what this was that we had the ability to be able to move processors and memory. Clearly, we're talking about activations here as opposed to physically having bits of computing equipment floating around inside your data center. We are able to move the activations between different systems that are defined in the pool. You could, and still can, have systems with different clock speeds can coexist in the same pool. And the activation, assignment, and resource is controlled by the HMC. The HMC, actually, we've expanded that just a little bit. It used to be that everything needed to be controlled by the same HMC. Now we have a concept of a master HMC, and you're also able to move that across if you need to. More on that later on. We did, when we originally brought these out, have 3 different types of pools that we were actually working to. There was the pool which was the original mid-range pool, where you could have the Power 7 Plus 770s and also potentially the E870 servers. You could do a pool with those. Originally, we also had a high-end pool, which was separate, where you could do the Power 7 Plus 780s, or you could have the Power 795s, and they could also be in a pool together, or also potentially including the Power E880 systems if you wish to do that. They were originally separate because the price for the activations for mid-range and high-end were different, and therefore we didn't want to have the ability to buy them at the cheaper price and move them into the high-end pools. But then when we moved into the world of the more current E980 kind of generations, we kind of smoothed it all out, so you could actually have a pool where you could have E980s and also the previous generation of Power 8 servers, E870s, E880s, E870Cs, E880Cs, any of those could coexist in the same pool and be able to do things and move them around as required. The activations can be moved within the pool at any time, and the main point here is that you don't need to worry IBM. But once you've set this up, you can take control yourself. You're able to move the resources, processors, memory resources, back and forth between the different systems in the pool. And you can do this from the HMC and take control yourselves. You don't need to worry about contacting us. And of course, the time delay that potentially would involve of needing to work through us to move things around. Here, you're able to do this at will, whenever you like, and to be able to move them around as many times as you want to without any kind of restrictions in that kind of space. The movement of the activations is instant, dynamic, and non-disruptive. And actually, a key point, which I'll come back to in just a moment, is that you are also able to actually have some of the activations running in more than one place at the same time. So with this system, if you're going to move a workload from system A to system B, you can actually turn on activations on system B, perform the move, and then you can turn them off on the system A as you go forward afterwards. Just a little bit, and there we are. I can see that mute's turned up. So that's the ability to move them around. Just as I say, just to mention Power Enterprise Pools 2.0, which I'll certainly come back to and talk more about later on in the presentation. Pools 2 was announced on the 23rd of April this year, was made available on the 17th of May this year, and so is relatively new compared to the Power Enterprise Pools 1. It builds on this and allows you to be able to do a range of excellent sort of flexibility here. Again, where we can have the concept of the base capacity, where you have, again, I'll explain that in more detail later on, but that's the ability basically to have a certain number of activations in your server across a variety of different systems, and then across the pool of your servers, if you don't use more than the base, you don't need to actually move anything at all. It will just look after it for yourself. Then there is the ability to go above and beyond that with a variable on-demand purchasing with capacity credits, so you can actually bring in a very cloud-like kind of world of being able to use things on demand, and all of that is tracked using the Cloud Management Console. And so you don't actually need to do the same level of moving things around yourself. You can just get on and use it, and then the systems will actually look after that for you, tell what you're using, and be able to give that back potentially by the minute with the actual utilization as you go forward. Again, I'll come back to Power Enterprise Pools 2.0 later on in the deck, so to talk a lot more about those and explain what's going on there and how to upgrade into them as well.
David,
so to move on initially.
There is a question, is it possible to transfer the mobile activation with a system upgrade for example, E870 to E980?
An E870 to E980, so you're going from one generation to the next. The answer is yes, and I'll certainly explore that in more detail as we go through the presentation deck. But going one generation, yes, you can. That can be done without charge. It does involve a certain process, and I'll expand on what that process is a little bit later on. I asked particularly about the generation because going from N-2, going from Power 7 Plus, for example, up into Power 9, you're not able to do that for free, but you can still potentially do it. Again, I'll expand on that a little bit later on.
Thank you.
No trouble at all. Very reasonable question. So to begin with, we adding capacity on demand resources to the systems. As I mentioned, with Power Enterprise Pools 1, the HMC manages all the additions of mobile resources to a server within a pool. It's the point of control. It's the HMC that matters. The server obviously needs to have inactive resources in it for it to be able to receive mobile resources that can go across. Obviously, we need to have the processors present to be able to get across to that system. And then once there, we can do the sort of process where we can, as I described, actually have resources coexisting. We can have the process of mobile resources being moved across into a target and actually coexisting on more than one place for up to 48 hours very easily. You can actually go longer than that as well. In the situation of a DR event, it's possible that you might well end up as existing on more than one box for a while, but you end up with an out of compliance situation. What you can certainly do without any kind of problem at all is have things exist on both sides at the same time and then move on. More about that later on. The mobile resources are added to and moved across, and then when you kind of move them across onto the other system, then you return them to the pool, and that's how resources are used in the first place. Mobile resources are added, are used to be able to satisfy that resource requirement from the unreturned pool first. And then the resources you're moving around on the server, the user can move them around with the HMC and remove them from the HMC, are moved about from the server and remove them via the HMC. What that means is that if you did have a situation where the server had died, so the actual system had crashed and therefore the processors are in many ways no longer available, it actually doesn't matter because the HMC is the one that actually is the important point. Therefore, if you have a system that dies, you can use the HMC to be able to move the resources over anyway, even if the system is no longer available. Again, I'll expand on much of that as we go forward. But the process to be able to move these things around and be able to get ready to be able to do a pool does have a process. Here is their process. So we have a number of different steps going on here. And you might not be too surprised to see that a certain pirate turns up at this point in proceedings. The number of steps involved in this can cause one or two challenges at the setup stage. And so I have had a number of instances where we're setting up the pool has one or two problems as you go along. And that's, of course, very much the point of this presentation, is so that you can highlight the issues that you might encounter and they then follow this process and knowing what ones you might get into trouble with and avoid those problems and move forward. So the first stage we can get into interesting challenges with is that we need to have a contract. Indeed, we actually need to have two contracts. To be able to set up a pool in the first place, you've got to have a license supplement for the Power Enterprise pools. You need that once for each client, and that's basically just giving you the sets of terms and conditions that you're actually sort of writing up to and saying that this is what you will accept. Part of what you're accepting there is that you understand that we can allow you to run those processors and memory in more than one place at the same time, but you're committing to the fact that you will actually turn them off. It could be theoretically possible for you to be able to take servers, for example, activate processors in different boxes and then maybe disconnect them from each other and then have the resources actually running in multiple places at the same time for longer than you're supposed to. And that, of course, is breaching the contract, and that is what the contracts are for, is to make sure you understand what you are and are not allowed to do, and that's what the first one is about, is explaining what those are. The license supplement of the Power Enterprise pools then goes on to actually say which systems are actually in the pool. So that's basically a list of serial numbers, the list of machine type model numbers and serial numbers that show which servers are actually part of the pool, and that all gets sent back to our Power Capacity on Demand team in America so that they can see what makes up the pool, and you've also signed to accept the contract in the first place. As I say, why do I need these contracts? It's because the pools allow you to be able to have the resources moved around and run it in more than one place at the same time. And so because you've got that, that's what the contract is there for. You can activate the resources before you deactivate them. As I say, this is the ability to move them from side to side, have them activated on box B, so you can do maybe, for example, a live partition mobility, and then turn them off on box A, and that's what this allows you to do. And the contract is there to say that you are permitted to do that, and you can have that move them around at the same time. So we need to have the contract in place to be able to make sure that you know that you have to return them to a given state. And so you've got to have the contract in place, and that's a piece that you've got to set up right at the beginning. So what do you do next? After you've got the contracts, then you get these different elements in place. Then you can actually put a particular feature, the feature EB35, can be applied onto your different servers. And at that point, our ordering team check to see if you actually have the contracts in place. So the ordering team looks into what's been sent in, works with Power COD team to be able to see what's going on, and so you can apply the EB35 once the contracts are done. And once you've done that, then the pool is set up, then you're able to begin moving things around. Then you can actually get into the world of having mobile activations, begin to create the XML file, which I'll explain more about in a moment, and then be able to move things around from the master HMC. So with that XML file configuration in place, the master HMC knows what the servers are in the pool, knows what the mobile resources are, and is then able to begin moving things about. So I've already thrown in one or two terms, and so what I'll just expand on here is just explaining one or two of the terms that get used here, which are connected with that process. So there's a term to begin with, which is static. Static in many ways is the traditional processors that we're used to. So these are the ones that don't move. These are the standard server processors or memory on the individual systems that are not intended to move around. You've got to have some of these. Each server in the pool has to have some resources on them that don't move, so that they are actually functioning as servers in their own right and could actually operate outside the pool. So you always got to have a certain quantity of static processors and memory in each one of these servers. And as I say, they're fairly straightforward. They're the ones that don't move. They're the standard servers. Then you've got the ones which, of course, are the point of what we're trying to do. You have the processors and memory, which are mobile. Processors, you get from individual cores and individual processor activations. Mobile is done in 100 gig memory activation increments. The 100 gig is maybe not ideal, as normally we tend to work in more sort of numbers that are based around base 2, but never mind, those are the memory activations we work with, and so you can move those around. Once you're set up in your pool, you can move them from server to server. We then have another one, which is the mobile-enabled. Mobile-enabled processors are fundamentally static ones, which are going to be on those different systems, but they are the same price as the mobile versions. Now, that might seem a bit odd, and I'll explain why on earth we might need such things in a moment, but as I mentioned, mobile resources, mobile processor resources, and memory resources are a little bit more expensive than the static ones, so there is a difference in cost, and the mobile-enabled ones have the same cost as the mobile versions, but actually deliver statics, and again, I'll explain why in just a moment. And then, of course, we have the HMC's XML file. The HMC is what does the control. The XML file is what knows what's in the pool, and so that's actually what is controlling the system overall. It's not so much about individual keys and codes that were delivered from the Power COD website. It's more about this XML file, which you put onto the HMC, and that's what delivers the control. So here's a pirate, and the pirate turns up because the mobile-enabled is a term that isn't maybe entirely intuitive to everyone that sees it, but as I say, what it delivers are the static versions for the same price as the mobile ones, and they're very useful actually. They have a place. They're used when you haven't got the contracts ready, but you want to be able to sign a deal and be able to get everything for the correct price, because of course you, our customers, would quite normally want to have one particular purchase order put through for the price that you're actually going to pay overall, and so it makes perfect sense to want to have one deal to give you the pool at the end of the day, but at that point you don't have the serial numbers, so you can't necessarily finish the contracts because you haven't got the serial numbers to finish that piece. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg that takes place there. So the mobile enabled are there to allow you to sign to finish off a purchase order that is for the correct price that you'll pay overall, and then you can convert from a mobile enabled to a mobile for no cost afterwards using a relatively straightforward MES process. So let me expand on that a little bit. So we have the pirates turning up because mobile activations work like static. There is a process of being able to convert across into static for a zero-cost MES. There are some codes, so if you go for mobile enabled, you do end up with the pod and mod codes turning up on the Power CD website, different from how we actually work in the XML file. Those codes are cumulative. You've got to be able to put them in the right order. If you get them out in the wrong order, then they won't work. And the codes are delivered per server. The mobile activations are fundamentally different. They are delivered in the XML file, which is on a slightly different area on the Power CD website. Each file is standalone, so it's not cumulative. You don't have to apply each one of these files as you go along. You can take the file, and assuming it has all the information in it that you want, you apply that to your HMC, and then that works from there on in. And you get an XML file, not per server, but you get them delivered per pool. And so that's a fundamental difference between how these different things work. The mobile enabled, they work with pod and mod codes. The rest of the mobile resources work in an XML file. So we need to make sure we're using the right things at the right time. So a very common mistake that we've had quite a lot of our business partners working through our customers actually do is that maybe you've had an initial order where you've been setting up a brand new set of enterprise servers. At that stage, you don't have the serial numbers, so you can't necessarily get the contracts, and so you need to be able to use those mobile-enabled activations to be able to give you the correct cost for your pool overall and be able to move forward and get the purchase order done. Then you get your contract signed, and then you can do the process to convert from mobile-enabled to mobile, and so you're all good so far. So far, so good, no pirates just yet. Then it's not at all uncommon that maybe you need to add some additional capacity. So the business partner might look back at what feature codes he ordered last time and might then order the same ones again. But that's not the right thing to do. Once you've got the contract signed, once you've got the serial numbers in place, then you don't need to use mobile-enabled anymore. Because what you're doing there is adding a process which needs to be converted. Adding in mobile-enabled, they work because they deliver the static processors, they deliver processors the customers can use, but you then need to convert them, and with an additional MES over to mobile activations. And that's just extra work for no benefit. You're not actually helping things, and one or two things can potentially go wrong at that point because you're adding extra steps into the process that you don't need. So if the pool is up and running, what you want to do is order the mobiles, not the mobile-enabled activations, and you can use those for further capacity. Again, we'll sum up that later on, but it's a common thing I have seen go wrong once or twice in the past. Now, this is maybe a little bit of an eye test, but don't worry, I'm not expecting you to read that particular screenshot. I just want to, again, explain a little bit about what goes on in the XML file. The XML file, as I say, is the key and core to what actually controls a Power Enterprise Pool's one configuration. And there are one or two things you can actually simply read out of this in a fairly standard form once you know what you're looking for. So in the XML file, you will find a pool ID. And that's written near there at the top of the XML file itself. That is unique to each pool, and so you can see that you're working with the file for that particular pool, and customers can certainly have more than one. There will then be a sequence number. As described, you don't need to apply each and every one of the XML files as they get created. The sequence number shows whether there has been changes made to the XML file or not, and so what you want to use is just the most recent version. You can check on the website, see if there is any more recent version on there, if the sequence number has increased, and you just want to use the most recent version and apply that. You have within this as well the memory resource entitlement. You can see that I've kind of highlighted how you might be able to decode that great big long sort of code or key that is within the XML file. There are a couple of key important digits within this, and so I've highlighted in bold there that towards the sort of, what have I got? The least significant digit of, so I think it's point number 10, you've got the next 4. I actually tell you how many features for the mobile in memory you actually have in this pool at this time. So it's not giving you directly a quantity of memory, it's giving you the number of features. Each feature delivers 100 gig, so you multiply that by 10, and that's how much mobile memory is present in the pool. Similarly for processors, you can do the same thing. As I mentioned, processors are delivered on individual cores, so it's a simpler number to read here. I've highlighted that this one has 0021. That means this pool has 21 mobile cores to work with, and so you can actually take that straight out of the XML file, and you can see what your actual resource entitlements are. Then you've also got in the file a list of who the pool members are. So you've got the machine type and model, you've got the serial numbers, but what it doesn't say is these boxes have this many individual processors themselves. It talks about what's total in the pool. So you've got a list of servers, list of machine type and models, list of serial numbers, and then separately you have a total number of processors and a total number of memory that are there in the pool. So that's what the XML file looks like, and you can actually take some useful information from it as you go along. So again, we have the process which actually in some ways was kind of highlighted by the earlier question. It's important to understand there are just a couple of different views, if I can use the term, of mobile activations. We inside of IBM, and also those of you who are our business partners on the call here, we use a tool called eConfig to be able to configure the vast majority of Power Systems orders and upgrades. And in that view, we can see a certain image of what your mobile activations are, and we see that actually by the individual serial numbers and system numbers of the servers. We can see the feature codes, and we can see the feature codes that were ordered against individual servers. And although it's got written in the description that these are mobile feature codes when we're working with those kind of features, it doesn't really know that the eConfig tool doesn't really understand that I can move things back and forth between different systems. It isn't coded that way. Customer view, your view of the world, if you are a customer, you'll see things from the HMC. And so the HMC understands the XML file, he knows who's in the pool, he knows the total number of mobile activations, knows the static activations on the server as well, because the HMC has both views, and it doesn't really understand what our kind of world back in IBM might look like. And we have had instances, once or twice, where the two worlds haven't necessarily aligned. So as we move into setting up a Power Enterprise pool, it's important to make sure that the IBM inventory system, that which eConfig works upon, does have the correct view of your world to start with. We've had one or two problems in that space where maybe things get out of step for whatever reason. So it's important to have them correct in the first place, and then we can make sure that we move forward and get the two views synchronized. Also, as I'll talk a little bit later on about moving things, I'll just come on to this in the next slide. We were asked earlier in the call, can I move processors from a Power 8 system into a Power 9? And yes, we started that with Power 7s being able to move up into Power 8s, and there is a process. But again, making sure that these two different views of the world, the eConfig view and the HMC view, align is rather important to making sure that process works. So here is the process that was originally outlined to be able to move your resources from maybe, for example, Power 795s that I have in this particular case up into E880s. It's the same thing if we were going to go from the 770 up into an E870, and it's the same fundamental process, although there are a couple of key details which I'll come to a little bit later on that talk about if I'm moving from an 870 up into an E980, basically the same process is used. So what we do is we've got our Power Enterprise pool, we've got the pool that's set up already, and what you'll have here as you want to be able to move things around, it'll have the concept of a donor and a target. So if I'm going to be moving from my Power 7s and I want to move up into my Power 8s with the intention of retiring my Power 7 boxes, the 795s become the donors, the 880s become the targets, and so we can move that forward and as we get ready. We will have, because this is a pool, each one of the servers will have an EB35 feature code on it. Those are the ones that say I have the contracts in place, and so we'll have a pool set up and ready to be able to move forward, and we can get ourselves ready at that point to be able to move on. Then, because I'm wanting to be able to move things and remove things from my 795, I go through the process of an RPO MES. So MES is what we use to describe an upgrade. An RPO is a record purpose only. So what we're fundamentally doing there is we are changing the IBM internal view of the world inside of IBM Inventory Services. This is, again, the thing that eConfig works with, but we're not really touching anything that actually happens on the HMC. We're just trying to update the IBM inventory information to show that we are taking off various mobile and processor and memory resources, potentially also Power VM as well, maybe also software, taking these things off of the system that is the donor of, in this case, the Power 7, so we can then add them onto the Power 8s. So then what we want to do is request an RPQ. which basically is a trigger to be able to have us just check that the different systems have actually been gone through. We've done the RPO MES to reduce. We've also done the process to be able to actually move on and add them. So we do the RPO, again, MES to increase them, RPO process to be able to increase on the target system and move forward. You come down on the Power 7s, come up on the Power 8s, and then the RPQ just triggers a check. Have we got it all in place? Have we got everything we need to? And then we move forward from there. So we can finish it off and be able to put them onto the new system. And again, RPO MESs just change the view of the world from the IBM point of view, and they don't touch the HMC. And then lastly, we can actually do this and trigger the creation of actually a final process of actually creating a new XML file so you can actually see what's going on there. Lastly, you may need to contact TSS to be able to make sure that any kind of changes to your maintenance take place at this point because you're moving these activations around. So again, let me just expand on that a little bit because it has caused one or two problems. So you've got inside of the different systems, you've got the mobile processors we talked about before. So on 870s, you've got a mobile processor activation. On an 880, you have again a mobile processor activation, and straightforward enough, on an E980, you also have these things which are mobile processor activations. What we also have we have on the Power 8s, we have these ones which are feature codes which talk about that they originally came from Power 7. So an EP83 shows that on an E870C, these processors actually started off life on a Power 7 box and moved up into a Power 8. You see, I talked in my answer to the original question about, yes, you can move resources from one generation to an N+1. The expectation is you can move those up without any charge. However, you shouldn't expect to be able to move the resources from N-2 back across for no charge. So that's what these features are intended for, but unfortunately they're not discussed in the original instructions in the RPQ. So you need to be a little careful that you're using the right things. So if I'm going to move from a Power 8 to a Power 7, what I really want to do is turn off the mobile resources on my Power 7 and use these features, EP83 if you're on 870C or EP8K if you're on E880C, to show that it originally came from a Power 7. That means that as we move onwards and maybe move the processors up into E980 in the fullness of time, I have a similar one here that says it originally came from Power 8, or it originally came from Power 7. And those introduce different charges as you move along. So they have a different sort of process, and we should be able to tell, has the processor originated on an older server, and therefore know whether I can move it up for free or not. But those aren't, as I say, documented in the original instructions, so you just need to be a bit careful of that and a bit aware as you move forward.
David,
one other item that
David, before you move on, there are a couple of, well, there's a comment and a question. So one of the comments that is referring to an RPQ, a particular RPQ that was available for transferring mobile cores or memory activations that were originally bought on Power 8 to Power 9. So yeah, there is that RPQ, and it's RPQ 8A2535. And then the question I have is, can we move complete mobile memory from Power 795 to E880? And the reason they're asking is if we remove it using RPO MES on the source system, the total memory, static and mobile activations can go less than 50% of the installed memory, and eConfig does not allow that.
Okay. So, so to the first part, yes, quite right. There was one RPQ which talked about the process to be able to move from Power 7 to Power 8. There's now a new RPQ that talks about the process to be able to move from Power 8 to Power 9. And that's the RPQ you described. And again, what's intended to happen here is use these individual feature codes to be able to highlight where you actually came from originally, so that we actually know what the processes were, so you can move from one generation to the next, but know that you can't necessarily do that again into the next generation beyond for no charge. So yes, I think I agree. So less of a question, more of a statement.
Yeah.
Then, as you say, then there is the process. Yes, can we move from the 795s up into the E880s? So once you're in a pool that actually setting up the 795s up in a pool does change the rules for what you're actually able to do and move the memory around. So we should be operating in a world where overall the entire pool has to have half the memory activated in some fashion, be that mobile or static, and then you can come down to 25% of the memory down in the 795. So yes, you should be able to move memory and processors from the 795 into the E880. If econfig is throwing up issues in that space, then it's something we can look into, because yes, you are intended to be able to move in that kind of space. A lot of the discussion in the RPQ process was very much about processors, but memory is also something you can move. It's very much about investment protection, talking about the cost of those activations, being able to move some of those. If I can move the memory around in the pool, I should be able to move them permanently across and retire the 795s and be able to move forward in that space.
Thank you.
Happy to explore the details of that if necessary. After all, we can see what we can look into. But I want to talk about software because it's very much connected with that move. So for one, you are able to have a range of software: AIX, IBM I, PowerVM, PowerSC, PowerHA, PowerVP, PowerVC, lots of different software that potentially you can have in the pool. And what the contracts allow you to do is be able to move your activations around for that different software, again, within the pool. What you would normally do is you would normally have at least one entitlement, one license, with potentially down as low as one entitlement, depending on the software, on each one of the members of the pool. One of the reasons for doing that is to allow you to be able to raise support calls with IBM support. They would look to the serial number, and as long as you have a entitlement, which can be as low as I say of one processor core on the member you're looking at, you'll be able to raise a support call. Then, because you're able to move them around within the pool, as long as you maintain the correct number of software licenses as you move around, then you can move them about within the pool in very much the same way that you can move the activations around as well. And that includes being able to run them in more than one place at the same time for up to 48 hours. Now, I put this particular slide in at this point because it's also important to consider your software when you are performing some of those moves. We just talked about, for example, the example of moving from a 795 into an E880. We talked about the need to move the mobile processors and potentially also the mobile memory, but you should also consider the software. If there is, for example, AIX or PowerHA or any of this other software we're listing here, if it stays associated in the IBM systems with the 795, when you retire it, you'll actually lose access to those licenses. So you need to make sure that you perform a move, that you move the software from your target to your donor. This, of course, can be done for most software. So again, your AIXs or your PowerHAs, you can actually move it yourself inside of ESS. So it doesn't need to be complicated, but you need to make sure that it's on the target system before you retire the older box, or you may lose access to that software. Okay, so in that movement process, a couple of things that you should take away. Ensure that the reality of the installed machines matches the IBM inventory records before you begin. So I described the two different views. I described the view that we have inside of IBM using econfig, which talks to the IBM inventory systems. And of course, you've actually got your real view, the HMC view, the view actually of the servers. And we want to make sure those two do align before you begin setting up a Power Enterprise pool, as one place that we have had problems occur is if they don't get actually lined up very well, then you can have one or two problems. Get the contracts going early. So this was more important when we were doing the Power Enterprise pools for the very first time, but contracts need legal teams involved. They can take a while to get signed, and that potentially can slow things down. So this, of course, was why we created the mobile-enabled activations in the first place, that you can use the mobile-enabled activations if the contracts might not be ready and your order might be delayed, or you want to make sure that everything is in the same purchase order, but you haven't quite got the contracts finished off yet. And of course, the contracts need the serial numbers too, so it can be a challenge to get them all sorted out first. So mobile enabled have a very valid purpose. You can use them at that point to be able to get your costs right in the first place, and contracts need to be set up and going, because you won't be able to use your pool until the contracts are signed. Again, going through legal teams, that can take a little bit of time, so the advice is to get those going early. They shouldn't be too onerous, but it can just take a bit of time. then you want to keep a good record, and the they, particularly I'm talking to the IBM business partners here in actual fact, keep good records of the starting positions of the servers, the changes you made, and also the order numbers that you're doing there. And if we do have any kind of problem, if the XML file doesn't look right when it gets created, if something wasn't quite right about the IBM inventory systems to begin with that caused that problem, then being able to have a good picture of where we started and where we went through to can be really helpful. And the order numbers are also part of that picture, which can be very helpful to help us unpick what goes on and tidy it up. A piece I didn't mention, particularly didn't dwell on, but the XML files as they get created, when they very first appear, then you could find that they are zero size and length, because that's actually perfectly normal. The order process creates the XML file just as a sort of placeholder, and then as the rest of the order process gets moved through, as you add the EB35s, as you add the various mobile resources, then the XML file gets populated. So you need to be a little bit aware of that. If you first see an XML file appear and it doesn't have a size, don't worry, just give it a little bit of time. If all your servers or all your mobile resources aren't showing in that XML file, and I gave you the hints and tips to be able to how to read them earlier, then again, give it a little bit of time, because it could just be that we're all processing one of the servers in the pool and others haven't quite caught up yet. So it can just take a little bit of time, and then you want to watch the iterations and to see when it's actually ready. And when the resources turn up and the files stop changing, that's when you can begin using them. As I say, don't order mobile enabled once the pool is running. So once your pool is running, then don't use the mobile enabled anymore. You've got the contracts, everything's ready to go. So what you want to do instead is target using the mobile resources themselves. That's what you want to use at that point, not mobile enabled. Okay, next I'm going to move on to Power Enterprise Pools 2. But shall I just pause and if there's any questions about that, I can take them at the end as well. But if there's any other questions, feel free to ask them at this point before I move on to Power Enterprise Pools 2.
There aren't any at the moment, so if you have got questions, just ask them into the chat window and we'll take them at the end.
Yep, okay, no problem, let's do that. So, Power Enterprise Pools 2. So in my opinion, I do see the Power Enterprise Pools 2 seeing a number of the pirates and kind of challenges that I just highlighted. Lots of these get tidied up and cleared away with Power Enterprise Pools 2.0, and it goes above and beyond that and does a number of different cool things above and beyond that as well. There's lots of information about this available, so I'm not going to go into tremendous depth here, but just to make sure that you understand what goes on here, I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking about Power Enterprise Pools 2 before, again, I can hand over to my colleagues to be able to tell you about the cool things you can do with either of these technologies. So the first thing that is different with the concept of Power Enterprise Pools 2 compared to the previous versions is we have this term of base capacity. So base capacity is in many ways a little bit like the static resources that you had on the individual systems, but actually you should also consider that this is the sum of the mobiles as well. So these are the standard permanent activations you have in the pool, but actually also flexible. They can actually move around within the pool as well. But these are the permanent activations. You do them for processors, and then you can also do the elements for the software activations as well. So you can do it as memory and processors across these different systems, plus also the actual software licenses. Then what you've got is, over and above that, the ability to grow above this. How you might have done that in the past is that elastic capacity on demand is a complementary technology to Power Enterprise Pools 1. And so many ways that this is handled here in Power Enterprise Pools 2 is they use a similar, but actually even more fine-grained ability to do metered capacity down to the minute. The individual servers will monitor what you're using and can use something very like elastic capacity on demand to be able to deliver deliver that computing power for you as you move forward. So I will expand on this and explain it in the next few slides. So here's the sort of standard base starting point. You've got my 3 different servers, so you've got your E980s, and as I did mention, Power Enterprise Pools 2 needs to be on E980s and on no other server yet. We can't have Power 8s, for example, in a pool, Power Enterprise Pools 2. It's got to be all E980s. More about that as we talk about migration later on. So I've got my 3 E980s, and as you can see, System A has 32 as his base of 128 installed. System B has 64, System C has 96. And so across your entire view of the whole pool, I've got a total of 384 processors installed to play with, and the pool has 192 base activations to begin with. So far, so good. I come along, and so I've got these different kind of pool bases. I can use these, and they're measured, as I say, in minutes, and you monitor how people are using it. So I'll go straight on to using it. So you can see that here I've actually got the system is now up and running. The jaggedy lines are showing the actual usage of the servers as they go. I'm not talking about sort of activations here. I'm talking about how they are being used. So System A actually ends up using a sort of jaggedy line that's actually running above his 32 base, and that's okay. He can do that. System B is running quite calm. He's not using that much of his 64, and System C is fairly right-sized and is using approximately all of his 96. So across the whole pool, the Cloud Management Console is able to detect the fact that across the whole pool, the usage across all the different servers adds up to less than the base that is in the total of the pool. And that means you don't have to pay for anything else. It's all free within the capacity you've already purchased within the base. So no additional charges involved. And it just lets it happen. It monitors and lets it happen and controls it as you go along. Then maybe I've got the example where I am using a little bit more. So again, System A continues to be running fairly hot, and System B has now increased his utilization a bit. So he's now rising up and using a bit more of his base installation. That means that again, across here on the right, the overall usage now rises above the base that is allowed for within the pool. But again, that's okay, because I have a level of a pool of a metered capacity that can be used, burned up in a minutes basis using capacity credits. What you do is you buy up a certain pool of these capacity credits ahead of time, and then the servers can use those burned up by the minute, monitored by the Cloud Management Console, and so you can rise above the base utilization and again carry on working. So again, the point here is that I don't have to have any kind of process of really doing the moves. I don't need to worry about where the mobile resources actually are. I don't need to worry about too much about any of that kind of moving mobiles from box to box, because actually the system just does it for you. So we get away from all that complexity and we can get very, very agile and cloud-like moving forwards. It depends a little bit how fast you use these different credits up, depending on what you use them for. So memory, you can use lots and lots of memory against an individual credit. IBM software, as you'll be aware, carries a higher value than, for example, Linux or AIX, and therefore you burn up your capacity credits rather faster using IBM or if you choose to use Linux, for example, you'd burn them up at a slower rate. So there's the processor activations that you use the credits for, and there's also a variation depending on what software you use. But again, the Cloud Management Console is able to detect which you are running, and so it can see which kind of workload you're actually doing at the time, will therefore use up those capacity credits at the appropriate rate, and has a very sort of detailed process built into it to be able to do a level of throttling and control should you actually begin to run low on your pool. So we're not going to stop resources dead if you ever run out of your units. You'll be able to actually just have that throttled, so you've got time to be able to top up your capacity pool moving forward and be able to keep going depending on what you need. More detail is available because Jyoti did point out to me that there's a very useful blog which talks about the Power Enterprise Pools 2. So of course we'll be sharing these slides. You'll be able to get access to that blog, and there is the link to it, so you can see more information about those as you need. And also, as I mentioned, we've fairly recently announced the ability to be able to do upgrades. So we can now do upgrades from existing pools up into Power Enterprise Pools 2.0. So you can do this from existing E980s. So if I've got E980s I've sold that weren't originally in a pool, that's all right. You can, if you want to, upgrade into this space. There is a charge, and you should expect a certain level of charge to be able to move from your kind of ordinary worlds of statics and mobile activations up into this new world. It's not huge, but it isn't free. But what you'll do is convert anything that is a static or a mobile enabled or a mobile. They basically translate into the base. They get transferred over into as base entitlement on the E980, and then you can purchase a bit of additional capacity credits for that piece that comes above the base if you want to do that. So you can do this also if you've got the sort of transition coming up from a Power 8, for example. You'll note the Power 7s aren't mentioned here because I can't have a Power 9 and a Power 7 in a Power Enterprise Pools 1 at the same time. So you need to step through and gradually move forward into the pool world. You can go from 7 to 8 and then move onwards upwards from 8 to 9. But as I mentioned, you won't do that for free, but it is possible to do. So if you have a pool that exists today and you've got Power 8 boxes in it, then you can bring in E980s. Then you're able to do the same sort of move process we described earlier, transition away from actually having the existing pool. You can actually take all the resources can be moved across into the E980s. We talked about how to do that. Once your pool is entirely E980 alone, then you're able to move forward and make that into a Power Enterprise Pools 2. Lots more information available about that if desired. Again, happy to take questions about that now if you want.
Right. There are a couple of questions. So one is about what happens if you initially order EB35 features and then later decide not to use Power Enterprise Pools. Does this have a technical, commercial, or admin impact in the future for when new hardware resources are purchased?
Okay, interesting. To the best of my knowledge, I can't think of any particular problem there. But all that will happen there is applying EB35 will cause a trigger at the order stage to look to see if the contracts have actually been signed or not. So one thing that could possibly happen is if you haven't got the contract signed, then you could possibly delay your initial order of the servers. After they're installed, after they're in there and the contracts are in place, then there's no particular further problem at all. What you would do is you could certainly move on, not necessarily apply mobile resources to them. I don't really see a problem with that. You would be able to retire them from a pool if you wished, and as there are no mobile resources to worry about, you can simply drop them out of that pool by contacting Power COD and you amend the contract, or indeed give up the contract should you wish to do that. So no, I'm not aware of any problem in that space that it shouldn't give any harm, other than possibly having a little bit of delay at that initial order.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions regarding the prerequisites for Power Enterprise Pools 2.0, namely the IBM Power Systems Enterprise Cloud Edition. The question is related to the IBM I environment. And I know that recently one of our colleagues, Therese Eaton, found that there is an issue with the eConfig, which is being sorted out. But in the meantime, there are other things that you need to do. So I will put that information into the chat window after Turgut starts speaking, if that's all right, just so we don't take up too much time.
I'll just mention one thing about that, because, and as you say, we can put the details into the chat window, but the primary requirement that you must use at this point is that you've got to be using the Cloud Management Console. So the Power Enterprise Pools 2.0 really relies on CMC to be able to do all the monitoring to see who's using what and be able to move forward in that space. So you've got to have Cloud Management Console on these systems. That's an absolute requirement. And in case there was one or two minor issues with the durations that you might get Cloud Management Console for, we used to sell it with each of the enterprise boxes for 3 years, but there was actually a change to that earlier this year. And I do hope, but I must confess I'm out of date now and I need to go back and check again. When I last looked, the sales manual entries for the E980 hadn't changed to reflect the new durations. So the E980s used to say 3 years. They should now say you get it 1 year with an E980 purchase. That's just one thing to mention, because as I say, the Cloud Management Console is an absolute prerequisite to using Power Enterprise Pools 2.0 at this time. If that causes a problem, let us know, and we can have a conversation with people like George Gaylord, the owners of the offering itself, and see if there are possible ways and means we might move forward. But right now, Cloud Management Console is a requirement.
Okay, thank you. There are 2 or 3 more questions, but I'm going to defer them to the end of the session just so we can move on, if that's okay. So please bear with us.
I will prepare the process of stopping sharing here. So I should now have stopped. And so if you, Jyoti, would take control and pass it over to Turgut, I think that would be...
I will do in just a moment.
I can't see.
Yep, that's it. I've made Turgut a presenter now. Turgut.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. Hope you see my screen now.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you, David, for the first part. So to get the treasures, we will be looking at 5 different use cases here. Starting with the first one related to the Power Enterprise Tools version 2.0. We have developed a value assessment tool. So this tool is one of our system lab services tools that we develop to assist our clients. In this particular tool, actually, this is in fact more of a study where we guide our clients to collect CPU utilization data, and that data should be sent towards to us, and then we analyze it and come up with some optimum values for Power Enterprise Tools 2.0 configuration. As you know, there are some base licenses concept in PEP 2.0, and required excess capacity is covered by capacity credits, which is calculated by minutes in CMC, and capacity credits might cost more than the base licenses. So if you look at the trend analysis, the utilization levels of CPU over a period of time, you may need to understand how much base licenses are required for the long period of time. In this tool, we try to focus on the historical utilization data, type and the type of the targeted architecture, type of the hardware and software list of prices, and we try to find the optimum value for the client of how many base licenses would be required in versus how much of the capacity will be offloaded to capacity credits. Because if we purchase too many base licenses up front, it will be a waste of base licenses. And if we purchase too little base licenses, we will be costing a lot more on capacity credits. So the utilization data we rely on is in fact on HMC. If we enable LSL power utilization data collection, most clients do with the LPAR to RRD. And in this data, we can look at individual CPU cycles that being consumed, and we crunch this data by minute basis, come up with some solutions. This is the outlook of our tool. We obviously have some list prices for individual different type of configuration items in the e-config, different type of hardware and license and the operating system different levels. So this also could address some of the questions in the chat box. So based on these numbers and list prices, we can crunch the utilization data and come up with the optimal value for the base licenses. This would be the first one to go through. So second use case would be PowerHA ROHA, resource optimized high availability. It is a set of embedded settings in PowerHA, and it obviously supports Power Enterprise Pools. In a traditional PowerHA cluster, we would assign same amount of resources to the standby node in the cluster, and in general, it is waste of resources. If the cluster nodes are hosted on frames that are in the same Power Enterprise Pools, then we can reduce the amount of resources assigned to the standby partition and configure PowerHA with ROHA configurations to grab required resources during failover. We could do the same thing without before PowerHA ROHA capability. We had some scripts that are written that you can incorporate in your start-stop scripts in PowerHA clusters, but it is now a part of the PowerHA configuration. In this hypothetical cost-saving scenario, let's say active cluster node has 64 cores and the 64 gigabytes of memory, right? And we reduce the configuration of standby partition to 1 core and 4 gigabytes of memory, saving 63 cores and 60 gigabytes of memory from the standby partition. In this example, if those two partitions are in the same pool, during the PowerHA failover, we can move the licenses, the activations of CPU and memory from one box to another, and we can save roughly 1.5 million US dollars in this hypothetical example. You can see how can you configure the Power Enterprise Pools related settings in PowerHA and be a happy pirate. Third use case would be related to Power VC and Power VC's DRO capability. DRO stands for the Dynamic Resource Optimization.
Good. Sorry, can I just interrupt because there was a question on the ROHA part. Is this only for AIX or does it support IBM I too?
So it should support IBM I as well, but I need to go back and check. If you can get the question, I will double check and get back to the original.
I will make a note. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question though. So the third use case would be Power VC and DRO, Dynamic Resource Optimization. When enabled, it can continuously monitor resource utilization of physical hosts and virtual machines in a cloud environment, right? And based on policies determined by the Power VC administrator, it can either send alerts in the advise mode, or it can trigger actions in active mode, and it can trigger actions automatically due to LPM in between frames to balance resources. As you can guess, Power VC DRO capability incorporates Power Enterprise Pools, and it can move activations in between frames when needed. The common question about Power VC and DRO when I present this in tech use, most clients say, sometimes they say, hey, I cannot configure Power VC because of this and that. The best part of DRO is you don't need the Power VC to be set up altogether. You don't need to full-blown Power VC configuration. You just need to install Power VC to exploit the DRO capability. All you need is to configure the Power VC, identify your HMCs and discover your frames. Then create your host groups, set your thresholds for DRO settings and other parameters, and you're set. DRO can be enabled for existing groups, existing host groups or new host groups. It can be set for advise or active mode. You can set your threshold settings. Individual hosts can be excluded from the host groups anytime. And DRO advise mode will send alerts about thresholds being exceeded, whereas the DRO active mode will automatically move LPARs when needed. Starting with Power VC 1.3.2, DRO can be scheduled for specific time frames, which can be useful. Starting with Power VC 1.3.2, memory-based DRO is also possible when using NovaLink, obviously, which also supports Power Enterprise Pools mobile memory licenses. Fourth use case would be LPM. I'm quite sure many of the clients use LPM nowadays. This particular section is talking, we are incorporating one of our great tools called LPM automation tool. This tool can be used to evacuate frames in different scenarios. This tool has strong abilities, including scheduling, automation, plans, and rolling back the partitions to their original location. We have delivered this tool to more than 400 different clients across the world. This is our fastest adopted tool ever. In this tool, you can select your individual frames and partitions on the left, and you can select your target frames on the right. You can click next, and the tool will validate every move possibility for you, give you various configuration options to finalize your plan. And of course, this tool incorporates Power Enterprise Pools and can automatically shift mobile activations in between frames during LPM operations for you. Owner of the tool, my good colleague from Austin, Bob Foss, videos about this. He has a YouTube channel. And also we have a good amount of information documented in our IBM community. I strongly recommend you to check it out. By the way, I'm the European liaison for this type of tools. Please don't hesitate contacting me right now or later when you have questions. Last use case would be the IBM VM Recovery Manager, Virtual Machine Recovery Manager. This is the IBM software solution. It is from IBM Power HA team. It works in the virtual machine restart area as a solution. It has an orchestrator called Cases. It is an orchestrator software called Cases. It runs on AIX LPAR. We typically position it on a standby machine in the active side, or we position in the DR side. It continuously monitors the health status of partitions and host frames, and it can trigger actions based on defined policies, recreating a failed VM on another server. As you can guess, obviously, this solution also incorporates Power Enterprise pools, saving the need of idle resources on standby frames. Enterprise pool support was introduced in the very first edition of the solution when it was called GDR. So, one last warning about disaster recovery and Power Enterprise pools. By the design, if a disaster happens when a frame goes offline, it takes its mobile resources with it. By the eyes of HMC, the licenses are associated with the frame, which frame is inaccessible. So if you'd like to utilize those resources, you can still utilize them in another frame, marking them as in unreturned state, because in the eyes of HMC, those resources are assigned to a frame which is inaccessible and that are not returned to the pool yet. So you can utilize them in another frame up to a certain amount of time. We have grace period for every frame, and we also have the pool grace period. The bad news part 2 is if the server grace period expires and the pool grace period expires, now the resources are locked in place, which means you cannot move licenses in between frames anymore until you can return those unreturned resources on failed machine. Sometimes if you are going through really bad disasters, say your machine failed and the data center cannot come back online for a couple of days or not at all, that means we need to resolve this working together. IBM can work with you to resolve this problem by creating a new XML file that deleting the out-of-compliant servers from the pool. Overall, those are the top 5 use cases with Power Enterprise pools and hunting the treasures. Let us know if you have any questions now or later, and don't hesitate contacting us using this information. I'm sure there are some questions in the chat window. Jyoti?
Yes, thank you, Turgut, very much. David has been answering some of them, so I'm just going to roll through to the beginning of the question list and make sure we've taken them all. Just before I do that, can I just let people know that you may have noticed the PowerVog wiki page is hosted on something called the IBM Developer Works Connections platform. And at the top of the wiki page, you may have noticed a banner that has gone up saying that the Developer Works Connections platform will be sunset at the end of the year. I am working with people internally to make sure that we find a suitable new home. And the important news is that the PowerVog webinar series is not going away. It is pretty much still in operation and will be. So I'm not planning on stopping doing these webinars. So just be assured, and we will get the details out of new home to you as soon as we have that finalized. So do not worry. Okay, I think David, you were about to comment or say something.
Yeah, I was just in the process of answering one of the questions that I've sort of typed half my answer to already, and that there was a question: are there plans to have in the future PEP1 and/or PEP2 offering available for mid-range E950 servers? To the best of my knowledge, No. To the best of my knowledge, the enterprise pools is intended for something that is for the high-end servers only. I'm just in the process of sort of following that up with, if you do have customers who want to see this, then of course bring that to the attention of either through myself or direct the offering management team. Happy to look at those, but to the best of my knowledge as regarding plans, I don't think we have plans to do this outside of E980s at this time.
Thank you. Then there was a question about is the upgrade from PEP1 to PEP2, does that require downtime? I don't know if you've answered that
Yes.
already.
I've answered it to the best of my knowledge in that certainly moving from getting to the stage of having a PEP1 that is exclusively E980s is certainly something you can do without any downtime at all. I expect, but I have to put it in that kind of slightly hesitant terms, I certainly expect us to be able to move from PEP1 to PEP2 without downtime. What we're fundamentally doing there is turning on all the resources in the servers and handing them over to control by the CMC. I expect us to be able to do that dynamically, but I must say I would need to go and get that confirmed. So my ask was if I could have that question sort of passed through to me in email form. I'm happy to go and get that confirmed by the team. I believe so, but I will need to confirm it.
Okay, thank you. And then I did post information about the cloud management console requirement, the prereq, into the chat window, but just for the recording. For IBMI clients who want to use Power Enterprise Pools 2.0, we do, as in IBM and business partners, will need to add the Cloud Management Console subscription so that they can administer the pool, and we should add a minimum of 12 months subscription term for the configurations for the time being while this is being investigated internally. So a solution will appear at some stage, but in the meantime, in the interim, please do add it manually.
And just to add to that, the Power Enterprise Systems Enterprise Cloud Edition, not the one with AIX, but the ECB version, could have some benefits to IBMI as well. That we've expanded things like Power SC, for example, so that it actually does have some benefits to IBMI. Of course, you may or may not actually need those elements at this point, but it's something which once, as Jyoti says, we're investigating one or two slight issues in the eConfig space with that, and it may still add value to you, and so we'll get the final answer clarified shortly. But using IBMI doesn't rule out the use of Cloud Edition once we sorted out the minor issue in eConfig.
Thank you. Are there plans to incorporate and include the LPM automation tool into the Power VM Enterprise license or Power VC license, or as a separate orderable software with software 57665 type model?
I should answer that question.
Yes.
LPM automation tool or any of the lab services tools that we develop, we as lab services consultants develop them on the go when we travel from one location to another, one client to another, see their struggles. That is why those are not official IBM software solutions. Those are lab services tools that we deliver as is without any commitments. So for the moment, to my knowledge, there are no plans to incorporate them in Power VM software license agreement or Power VC at all, because those are not considered as IBM software in IBM software portfolio. Those are just assets belong to lab services team, and we deliver them. But there might be in the long term, if most of the clients push for this idea, I don't know what's going to happen, but for the moment, there are no plans.
Thank you. And then there's a question about the Cloud Management Console tool, the 5765 CMT. Is it chargeable and does it have a SWAMA cost? It is a subscription-based charge. There is a charge, even if you're only using it for IBMI on enterprise systems with Power Enterprise Pools 2.0. Chandra, I'm not quite sure what you mean by moving from PEP1 to PEP2 in that regard. So maybe you can clarify your question. Any other questions? Please type them into the chat window. I don't see any others that are outstanding at this moment. While people are thinking about the next questions, let me just tell you very quickly about the next session that we've got lined up. That's going to be on the 11th of December. So please save the date. Same time, but a 1 hour session, so 10 to 11 UK time. And the session is it's titled The Art of the Possible with Power AI Vision. So this is going to be a colleague of mine, Sean Greaves, who's an AI technical specialist, going to be delivering the session. And he's going to take us through some fun demos and an understanding of what the latest and greatest is in this area, but also highlight the fact that actually do not need to have deep machine learning or deep learning type skills in order to kind of quickly get started. So I hope you can join us on the 11th of December at 10 a.m. UK time. I'll send out details with the replay information I send out for this webinar. So, okay, another question that's popped through. Any prospect of running a Redbook residence to document in detail the different scenarios for power and price pools? I'm not sure that the three of us can answer that, but we can certainly pass that on to the person who organizes the Redbook residences. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming through right at this moment, so I would like to thank David and Turgut very much for taking us through quite a lot of the material. And who knew that there was so much to learn and say about the Power Enterprise pools, both 1.0 and 2.0. So thank you both very much and for answering all the questions as well. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to add them to the chat window or email one of us, and we'll do our best to answer those. Okay, I'm going to end the recording, but we'll stay on for a couple more minutes after that. So it's over and out from the Dodia, as I've been recently called. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jyoti.